On your knees, clean it properly, or don't touch anything in this house again. The words didn't echo, they landed, flat, final, heavy enough to quiet the entire room without needing to be raised. Crystal chandeliers hummed softly above a 30-foot dining table dressed in white linen and gold trim, the kind of setting where even the silverware looked like it had a price tag no one dared to ask about. Naomi Carter didn't respond right away. She stood still beside the spill, a dark ribbon of red wine stretching across the polished marble floor, her reflection caught inside it, distorted, fractured, but steady. Around her, conversations had paused mid-sentence, forks hovered inches above plates, and the soft clink of glass against glass faded into something thinner, tighter. Richard Whitmore leaned back in his chair at the head of the table, one arm resting casually, like this moment required no effort from him at all. His cufflinks caught the light as he gestured lazily toward the floor. Well, he added, quieter this time, but sharper. Naomi moved then, not rushed, not hesitant. Controlled. She set the tray she had been holding onto a nearby sideboard, aligning it perfectly with the edge before stepping forward. The marble was cool beneath her shoes, the air conditioned to a constant 70 degrees, untouched by the late summer heat outside. She reached for the cloth, folded once, twice, then lowered herself down, not abruptly, not submissively, just precisely. The room watched. Evelyn Whitmore took a slow sip of her sparkling water, eyes scanning Naomi like she was inspecting a piece of furniture that had been slightly misplaced. At the far end, their son Lucas tilted his phone just enough, the faint glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes as he angled for a better shot without being obvious about it. Naomi pressed the cloth gently to the edge of the spill. No sudden movements, no wasted motion, just a slow, deliberate glide across the surface, absorbing the stain without smearing it further. The scent of aged wine lingered faintly, mixing with citrus polish and something floral drifting from the centerpiece. Someone cleared their throat. Another guest shifted in their chair, but no one spoke, because something about the way she moved didn't match the script they were used to. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't rushing to disappear. Her breathing stayed even, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze focused only on the task in front of her, as if the rest of the room had dissolved into background noise. Richard watched her for a moment longer than necessary, his expression unreadable, then reached for his glass again like the moment had already passed. But it hadn't. Not really. Because just as Naomi finished wiping the final trace of red from the marble, just as she folded the cloth again with the same careful precision, her eyes lifted, briefly, quietly, and in that single glance, there was no apology, no resentment, no fear, just awareness, the kind that didn't belong to someone invisible, the kind that noticed everything. The cloth remained folded in Naomi Carter's hand long after the marble had returned to its perfect, reflective shine, as if the absence of the stain mattered less than the precision of how it had been removed. She stood slowly, not drawing attention, yet somehow shifting the weight of the room again in a way no one could quite explain. The air felt different now, thinner, as though something subtle had been disturbed beneath the surface of polished routines and unspoken hierarchies. Naomi turned toward the sideboard, placing the cloth beside the tray she had aligned earlier, edges squared, corners exact, everything in quiet order. Her movements were efficient, practiced, but not mechanical. There was intention behind them, a rhythm that came from years of observation rather than instruction. Across the table, muted conversations began to return in fragments, voices carefully stepping back into place, but they did not rise to their previous volume. A man in a navy suit adjusted his cuff, glancing briefly in Naomi's direction before looking away too quickly. Evelyn Whitmore set her glass down with a soft, controlled tap, her lips pressing into a faint line that suggested dissatisfaction without needing to be spoken. "Next time, be quicker," she said, not looking directly at Naomi. Her tone smooth, almost conversational, yet carrying the quiet expectation of obedience. Naomi inclined her head slightly, a gesture so minimal it could have been missed if not for how deliberate it was. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice calm, even, untouched by the tension that still lingered in the room. But she did not rush away. Instead, She remained just long enough to gather the empty glasses nearest her, stacking them carefully on the tray, her fingers steady, her posture composed. As she moved around the table, she listened. Not obviously, not in a way that would draw suspicion, but she heard everything. Numbers spoken under lowered voices. Mentions of timelines, projections, a deal closing by morning. Richard's voice again, quieter now, confident, discussing percentages and risk as though both were things he could bend at will. Naomi's eyes did not lift, but something behind them sharpened, like a calculation taking shape in silence. She paused briefly near Richard's chair, reaching for a glass he had barely touched. For a fraction of a second, their proximity narrowed the space between them, and though he did not look at her, there was a faint tightening in his jaw, an awareness that flickered and disappeared just as quickly. Naomi stepped back, placing the final glass onto the tray. The weight of it settled evenly in her hands. Balanced, measured. She turned toward the service hallway, the soft soles of her shoes making no sound against the floor, her figure slipping past the edge of the room where the light dimmed and the conversations resumed behind her, louder now, as if trying to reclaim something that had briefly been taken. But Naomi did not look back. The corridor ahead stretched long and quiet, lined with neutral walls and recessed lighting that hummed faintly overhead. As she walked, the distant voices blurred into a low, indistinct murmur, replaced instead by the steady rhythm of her own steps and the quiet clarity of thought that followed. Because what they had said at that table had not been small, not casual, and not safe. And Naomi Carter had not come into that house by accident. The service hallway swallowed the sound of the dining room almost instantly, as if the laughter and polished voices had never existed at all, leaving behind only the faint hum of recessed lights and the distant vibration of a house too large to ever be truly quiet. Naomi Carter slowed her pace just enough to let the rhythm of her steps settle into something quieter, more deliberate, the tray still balanced evenly in her hands. Stainless steel doors lined one side of the corridor, each marked with small engraved labels: pantry, storage, staff access, all part of a system designed to keep certain people invisible while everything else remained flawless. She pushed through the kitchen door with her shoulder, the hinges barely making a sound, and stepped into a space that felt colder, sharper, more functional. The scent shifted immediately, citrus cleaner, warm metal, a hint of roasted herbs lingering from earlier preparations. No chandeliers here, no polished marble meant to impress, just clean surfaces and efficiency. She set the tray down beside the sink, aligning it parallel to the edge without looking, her hands moving from habit, but her mind was elsewhere. Numbers, percentages, words that had been spoken too casually for something so large. She reached for a glass, rinsing it under a steady stream of water, watching the surface clear, droplets sliding down in clean lines before disappearing. Behind her, a line cook moved past without speaking, headphones in, eyes down. Another staff member opened a refrigerator, the soft suction of the seal breaking and closing again. No one asked Naomi anything. No one needed to. She had been here just long enough to become part of the background, efficient, quiet, forgettable. That was the role, and she played it well. But as she dried the glass and placed it carefully onto the rack, her gaze shifted slightly toward the small digital clock mounted above the prep station. 9:42. The deal upstairs would not wait long. People like Richard Whitmore did not hesitate. They moved fast, signed faster, trusted their instincts because they believed their instincts had never been wrong. Naomi reached into the pocket of her uniform, her fingers brushing against the slim edge of her phone, not pulling it out, just confirming it was there. A habit, a reassurance. She exhaled slowly, barely visible, and continued working, stacking, rinsing, aligning, every movement controlled, every second accounted for. But beneath that calm surface, something else moved. A timeline adjusting, a decision forming. Because what she had heard was not just ambition or confidence. It was a mistake disguised as certainty. And the worst kind of mistakes were the ones made in rooms full of people who never expected to be questioned. Naomi turned off the faucet, the sudden silence sharper than the running water had been. For a moment, she stood still, hands resting lightly on the edge of the counter, her reflection faint in the stainless steel surface. Then she reached for the next glass, continuing her work as if nothing had changed at all. But everything had. Upstairs, the voices would grow louder again, contracts would be opened, pens would hover over signatures. And down here, in a room no one thought twice about, Naomi Carter was already 3 steps ahead of a decision they had not yet realized they could not afford to make. The kitchen clock ticked forward with quiet indifference, each second slipping past like it carried no consequence. But Naomi Carter felt every one of them land with weight, measured, deliberate, irreversible. She dried her hands slowly, pressing the towel flat against her palms before folding it once and placing it beside the sink, edges aligned with the same precision she gave everything else. Around her, the kitchen continued its low, steady rhythm, the soft hum of refrigeration units, the muted clatter of utensils, the distant murmur of staff moving in and out without urgency. No one noticed the shift in her posture, the subtle straightening of her shoulders, the way her gaze no longer drifted but fixed itself with quiet clarity. Upstairs, the deal was moving closer to completion. She could almost hear it, not the words themselves, but the tone, the confidence, the assumption that nothing could go wrong. Naomi reached into her pocket, and this time she did pull out her phone, keeping it low, angled slightly away from open sight. The screen dimmed to the lowest brightness. Her thumb moved once, unlocking it, then again, opening a file she had already reviewed more than once. Lines of text filled the display, dense, structured, precise. She did not scroll immediately. She already knew where to look. Section 12. Subsection C. A clause buried deep enough to be overlooked, but not harmless enough to ignore. Her eyes moved across the words again, confirming what she had heard, what she had suspected. Liability shifted. Control disguised. Risk transferred in a way that only revealed itself when it was too late to reverse. Naomi exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible even to herself. This was not just a bad deal. It was a trap built on confidence and speed, designed for someone exactly like Richard Whitmore. She locked the phone and slipped it back into her pocket just as the kitchen door swung open behind her. A server stepping through with a half-empty tray, moving quickly, distracted, already thinking about the next task. Naomi stepped aside instinctively, giving space, her expression unchanged, her presence once again blending into the background. But the decision had already been made. She could walk away, say nothing, let the night end the way it was expected to. That would be easier, cleaner, invisible. Or she could step outside the role they had assigned to her, cross a line that was never meant to be crossed, and speak in a room where her voice was not supposed to exist. Naomi reached for another glass, lifting it to the light, checking for any remaining marks, though there were none. The surface was flawless, like everything upstairs, like everything that was about to break. She set the glass down carefully, her fingers lingering for just a fraction of a second before releasing it. Then she turned, not toward the sink, not toward the storage doors, but toward the hallway that led back to the dining room. Her steps were quiet, measured, each one closing the distance between silence and interruption. The closer she got, the clearer the voices became, rising again, confident, controlled, unaware. Naomi slowed just before the doorway, the light from the dining room spilling across the floor in a soft golden line. She paused there, just outside the frame of their attention, her reflection faint against the polished surface of the wall beside her. For a moment, everything held. The voices, the air, the space between who she was supposed to be and what she was about to do. Then Naomi Carter stepped forward. Stop. The single word did not rise above the room, yet it cut through it, clean and precise, like a line drawn where none had existed before. Naomi Carter stood just inside the dining room now, the soft glow of chandelier light catching the edge of her profile, her posture straight, her hands empty at her sides. For a brief second, no one moved. Forks hovered. Glasses paused midair. The rhythm of conversation broke, not loudly, but completely. Richard Whitmore's head turned first, slowly, his expression tightening as recognition settled into place, not of who she was, but of what she was doing. "Excuse me," he said, his voice controlled, but sharpened by disbelief. Naomi did not step forward. She did not lower her gaze. "The clause you are about to sign," she said, her tone even, measured. transfers full liability to your firm under conditions that are not clearly defined in the summary you were given. A ripple moved through the table, subtle but immediate. One guest leaned closer to the document in front of him. Another exchanged a glance with the person beside him. Evelyn Whitmore let out a small, incredulous laugh, the sound light but edged. "This is not your place," she said, finally looking directly at Naomi, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to recalibrate what she was seeing. Naomi continued anyway. "Section 12, subsection C," she added, her voice steady, unaffected by the shift in tone around her. "It allows the opposing party to reassign operational responsibility after execution without requiring mutual consent. That means any downstream losses become yours alone." Silence pressed in again, heavier this time. Not disbelief now, but uncertainty. Richard's jaw tightened, his fingers resting on the table near the document, unmoving. "You expect me to take financial advice from someone clearing plates?" he asked, quieter. Now but colder. Naomi did not react to the words. "I expect you to read what you are signing," she replied. The air shifted again. Not louder, not explosive, just tighter. One of the men at the table flipped a page quickly, scanning, his brow furrowing as his eyes moved faster. Another leaned in, whispering something low that did not quite reach across the table. Evelyn set her glass down with a sharper sound this time. "That is enough," she said. "You are overstepping." Naomi held her ground, but she did not raise her voice. "If you sign tonight, you will not be able to reverse it tomorrow," she said. "The language is designed that way." Richard's chair moved slightly as he leaned forward, his presence filling the space again, reclaiming control by force of posture alone. "Security," he said, not looking away from her. The word landed heavier than anything else that had been spoken. Footsteps approached from the hallway, measured, professional. Naomi remained still, her expression unchanged, her breathing even. She did not argue. She did not defend herself further. She had already said what needed to be said. As the staff reached her side, the room held its breath again, suspended between dismissal and doubt. And for just a fraction of a second, before she turned to leave, Naomi's eyes met Richard's. Not defiant, not pleading, certain. Then she stepped back, allowing herself to be escorted out, her presence leaving the room as quietly as it had entered. But the silence she left behind did not fade. It stayed, settled into the edges of the table, into the documents, into the hands that no longer moved as quickly as they had before. The hallway outside the dining room felt colder than before, not because the temperature had changed, but because the noise had been cut off so abruptly that the silence now carried weight. Naomi Carter walked without resistance, her pace steady as the staff member guided her toward the service corridor, the soft click of dress shoes against polished wood fading with each step. Behind her, the door closed with a quiet finality, sealing the voices, the tension, the unfinished decision back inside. For a moment, no one spoke. The man beside her, trained to act without question, kept his gaze forward, his grip professional but not forceful. Naomi did not look at him. She did not look back. Her focus remained ahead, on the long stretch of hallway lit by evenly spaced recessed lights that cast soft pools of brightness across the floor. When they reached the intersection near the kitchen, he slowed slightly, as if expecting some reaction, some hesitation, something that would confirm she understood the line she had crossed. But Naomi simply stopped on her own, her posture unchanged, her hands resting calmly at her sides. "You should not have done that," he said finally, his voice low, not unkind, just factual. Naomi nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. "I know," she replied, her tone quiet, but not regretful. The man hesitated for a second longer, then gave a short nod of his own before stepping away, his responsibility ending the moment she was no longer in the room that mattered. Naomi remained where she was, alone now in the corridor, the distant hum of the house settling back into place around her. She exhaled slowly, the tension she had carried through the doorway releasing not in relief, but in clarity. There was no uncertainty in what she had done, no second-guessing, only the quiet awareness of consequence. From somewhere deeper in the house, a clock chimed once, the sound echoing faintly through the structure, marking the passing of another minute that could not be taken back. Naomi reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone again. this time unlocking it fully, her thumb moving with calm precision. The screen illuminated her face softly, reflecting in her eyes as she opened a secure application, one that required more than a simple passcode. A second verification. A brief pause. Then access. The interface was clean, minimal, built for function over appearance. She scanned quickly, confirming positions, timelines, approvals waiting in a digital queue. At the top of the screen, a single line remained unchanged. Pending authorization. Naomi's gaze lingered there, not because she was unsure, but because she understood exactly what it meant. Upstairs they were, still deciding whether to trust her warning, still debating whether to dismiss it or reconsider. But down here, in the quiet space they never thought about, the real decision had already been placed in her hands. She lowered the phone slightly, her reflection faint in the darkened screen as it dimmed. For a moment, she stood still, listening, not to the voices above, but to the absence of them, the space where certainty used to be. Then, with a single, deliberate movement, her thumb pressed forward. The screen shifted instantly. Pending change to executed. Somewhere beyond the walls of that house, systems responded, processes activated, lines of authority rerouted in ways that could not be undone with a signature or a conversation. Naomi locked the phone and slipped it back into her pocket, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady. The corridor remained quiet. The lights did not flicker. Nothing in the physical space acknowledged what had just happened. But Naomi Carter did not need it to. She turned slightly, her gaze lifting toward the direction of the dining room. Not to return, not yet, but to mark the moment. Because upstairs, they were still talking, still confident, still unaware that the outcome they believed they controlled had already moved beyond them. Upstairs, the rhythm of the room had changed, not in volume, but in certainty. The easy confidence that once filled every word now fractured into pauses that stretched just a little too long, glances that lingered just a little too carefully. Richard Whitmore stood at the head of the table, the contract still open in front of him, the same page Naomi had referenced now pulled closer, its clean formatting suddenly less reassuring under the sharp overhead light. "Let me see that," one of the investors said, leaning forward, his voice lower than before, stripped of its earlier ease. Pages shifted. Paper slid against polished wood. A finger traced a line of text, then stopped. Section 12. The man murmured, almost to himself, before his brow tightened, the words settling in with delayed weight. Evelyn Whitmore straightened in her chair, her posture still composed, but her eyes sharper now. Moving quickly between faces, searching for confirmation that this disruption could still be dismissed. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said, her tone controlled, but no longer light. "We have legal teams for a reason." But even as she spoke, another voice cut in, quieter, more cautious. "That clause is not standard." The words did not land loudly, but they did not need to. They carried enough uncertainty to shift the balance of the room again. Richard did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the document, scanning, pausing, returning to the same lines as if repetition might change their meaning. It did not. A phone buzzed softly against the table, the vibration subtle but noticeable in the sudden quiet. One of the guests glanced down, then again, his expression tightening as he read. Another phone followed. Then another. Not loud, not chaotic, just a sequence. A pattern. "What is that?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharper now, the edge no longer concealed. No one answered right away, because the answers were arriving faster than anyone could process them. Notifications stacked. Messages opened. Numbers updated in real time, shifting in ways that did not align with expectation. Richard's phone lit up last, the screen glowing faintly against the dark wood. He looked at it, not reaching for it immediately, as if delaying the moment might hold something in place. It did not. He picked it up. His eyes moved once, then again, and something in his expression changed, not dramatically, not visibly enough for anyone to name it, but enough to be felt. The room noticed. "Richard," Evelyn said, quieter now, the question no longer rhetorical. He did not answer her. Instead, he set the phone down slowly, the motion controlled, deliberate, as if the act itself required precision. "The accounts," he said finally, his voice lower than it had been all evening. "They are locked." Silence followed. Not the polite kind. Not the controlled kind. The kind that removes all pretense and leaves only what cannot be explained away. That is not possible, someone said quickly, but the certainty in the words did not hold. Because more phones were lighting up. More confirmations. More systems responding in ways no one at that table had initiated. Richard's gaze lifted, not to the document now, not to the people around him, but toward the doorway Naomi had walked through minutes earlier. For the first time that night, his certainty did not return. Because the decision had already been made, and it had not been his. The room did not recover from the silence. It settled into it, heavy and uncooperative, as if every polished surface now reflected something no one had prepared to see. Richard Whitmore remained standing, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the table, but no longer in control of it, not in the way he had been just minutes earlier. Around him, the investors shifted, not dramatically, but enough to create distance, chairs angled slightly, bodies leaning back instead of forward, a subtle withdrawal that spoke louder than any accusation. Evelyn Whitmore was the first to break, not loudly, but with a sharp inhale that cut through the stillness. "Call someone," she said, her voice tight, directed but uncertain. "This has to be a mistake." But no one moved quickly, because each person at the table was already looking at their own screen, reading the same confirmations, the same locked access, the same message repeated in different formats with identical meaning. Restricted. Suspended. Pending external control. Richard reached for his phone again, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if speed had lost its advantage. He opened the notification once more, scanning the details, searching for a loophole, a delay, a reversal. There was none. At the bottom of the screen, a name appeared, not hidden, not encrypted, simply placed there with quiet authority. Naomi Carter. The recognition did not come instantly, not as identity, but as memory. The stillness, the precision, the certainty in her voice when she had spoken. His grip tightened slightly around the phone before he set it down again, this time with less control. Across the table, one of the investors cleared his throat, the sound dry, uncertain. "If the capital is frozen," he said slowly, "then this agreement cannot proceed." Another voice followed, more direct. "We need to pause everything." Evelyn turned sharply toward Richard, her composure slipping just enough to show what had been held beneath it all evening. "Do something," she said, quieter now, but more urgent. Richard did not respond right away. His gaze had shifted again, not to the documents, not to the screens, but toward the doorway, toward the space Naomi had occupied, now empty but not forgotten. The weight of that absence pressed harder than any presence had. He straightened slightly, not with confidence, but with decision. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice low, cutting through the room not with authority, but with necessity. No one answered immediately, because no one had been paying attention when she left. A server near the far wall hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Service corridor, sir." Richard nodded once, already moving, his chair sliding back with a soft scrape against the floor. The room did not stop him. It did not follow. It simply watched as he stepped away from the table, away from the deal, away from the certainty he had carried so easily before. The hallway beyond the dining room stretched ahead of him, longer now than it had ever seemed, the light dimmer, the air cooler. Each step echoed slightly, not loud, but enough to mark his movement through a space he had never needed to think about. Until now. At the far end, near the intersection leading back toward the kitchen, Naomi Carter stood exactly where he had last seen her, direction, her posture calm, her presence unchanged, as if time had not moved for her at all. Richard slowed as he approached, the distance between them closing not quickly, but inevitably. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was different from before. Not dismissive, not controlled, real. Finally, Richard exhaled, the sound quiet, almost unfamiliar. "You knew," he said, not a question, not quite an accusation, just a statement that had arrived too late. Naomi met his gaze, steady, unshaken. "I tried to tell you," she replied, her voice even, without triumph, without bitterness. Just truth. Richard Whitmore did not step any closer after she spoke, as if the space between them had become something he could not cross without understanding what it now meant, his shoulders no longer carrying the same effortless authority, his posture held instead by something quieter, heavier, unfamiliar. The corridor lights cast a soft reflection along the polished floor, stretching their shadows in opposite directions, neither moving, neither retreating. Naomi Carter remained exactly as she was, composed, grounded, her hands resting naturally at her sides, not defensive, not open, simply present. For a moment, the house itself seemed to hold still around them, the distant sounds muted, the walls containing something larger than the conversation that was about to unfold. Richard exhaled slowly, the sound controlled but not hidden this time. "Why did you not say more?" he asked, his voice lower, not sharp, not dismissive, but searching for something that had already passed him by. Naomi's gaze did not shift. "I said enough," she replied, her tone steady, without emphasis. "You chose not to hear it." The words did not land as accusation. They did not need to. They simply settled into the space between them, undeniable, complete. Richard's jaw tightened slightly, but there was no immediate response, no quick correction, no attempt to regain control through language. Because for the first time that evening, there was nothing he could say that would change what had already happened. Behind him, faint voices echoed from the dining room, more urgent now, less composed, but they felt distant, secondary, as if they belonged to a different moment entirely. Richard glanced briefly over his shoulder, then back at Naomi, the shift subtle but meaningful. "Fix it," he said finally, the words quiet, stripped of command, carrying something closer to request than order. Naomi studied him for a brief second, not measuring his status, not weighing his power, but assessing the moment for what it truly was. Then she shook her head, not abruptly, not dismissively, just once. "It is already fixed," she said. Richard's brow tightened, confusion flickering across his face before settling into understanding that arrived too slowly to be useful. Naomi reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, holding it loosely, not as a display, not as proof, but as something already known. The screen lit briefly, reflecting in her eyes before dimming again. "The risk is contained," she continued. "The exposure you were about to take is gone." There was no pride in her voice, no satisfaction, only clarity. Richard absorbed the words in silence, the meaning unfolding in layers, not just what had been prevented, but how close it had come to happening without his awareness. His hand lowered slightly at his side, fingers no longer tense, just still. "You stopped it," he said, almost to himself. Naomi did not correct him. She did not confirm it either. Instead, she stepped past him, her movement calm, unhurried, the distance between them closing for only a second before widening again as she continued down the corridor. Richard did not turn immediately. He stood there, the quiet stretching behind her, his reflection faint in the polished wall beside him, no longer the center of the room, no longer the one holding the outcome. At the end of the hallway, Naomi paused briefly near the exit, the soft glow of exterior light filtering in through the glass, cooler than the artificial warmth inside. She adjusted the sleeve of her uniform, smoothing a crease that had barely been visible, then reached for the door. Outside, the night air moved gently, carrying the distant sound of the city, steady, indifferent, real. Naomi stepped through without hesitation, the door closing softly behind her, the sound barely audible, but final. Inside, the house remained exactly as it had been, structured, polished, controlled. But something within it had shifted, not loudly, not visibly, just enough that it could not return to what it had been before. And in the quiet that followed, there were no raised voices, no declarations, no explanations. Only the absence of certainty and the quiet, undeniable presence of consequence.